Well, hi everybody. Hope you all are recovered from Christmas and the new year is off to a fantastic start. I am looking forward to seeing each one of you and hearing all about your Christmas fun and your New Year activities. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all pretty soon. Just as a bit of an announcement, we will resume in-person school at Northeast Tech for our class starting the 20th, which will be, well, actually that'll be our online day, the 20th. And so if your class starts on Thursdays, Fridays, that group, then we will actually meet starting the 21st at school. And so Thursday, the 21st will be our first real day back. So I look forward to seeing everybody then and seeing what's going on. Just so you know, I'm doing just great. My parents have COVID, and so I've been kind of taking care of them. And I am not sick, but I have been exposed to those that are, and so I have to do my time out. And so I miss seeing you guys and all the fun that we have at school, but we'll get through this and then get to going again. So just bear with me for a few days and we'll get back to it. But today I thought we would move forward talking about meats. And so I'm going to show you this slide here that I have. Get it going for you here. There we go. Okay, so Anthony and I were talking a little bit a while ago. We were talking about holiday foods and if anybody had cooked anything special for the holiday. And Anthony said his family had roasted a turkey, and that sounds pretty good. So there's lots of kind of traditional things. Sometimes people do things like maybe untraditional things, maybe like a lasagna. Some people do some other kind of roasted type bird. And so I would be really curious to hear what your holiday traditions are, or something that you made for your holiday meals. So you can always email me or send me a text, and I'm always glad to hear from you guys. So let me know what it is that you fixed or what you had been making over the break. So we have for this group, for the year 2 students, we've moved on, as you can tell, to meats, leaving the baking and pastry section and moving on. So here we are at meats, and so we're going to talk about beef first, and then we'll probably talk about poultry and then fish if we have time, fish and seafood. So I did enroll you in a new Moodle group, and so if you get on there, you will see another course that you're enrolled in, which should say meat and poultry, I believe is what the heading says on there. And this week for your assignment, what I've got here, this week on your assignment, you there are some vocab words on there, and so if you will use your book, and you can also use this PowerPoint to help you answer those vocab questions, that'll be fantastic. And then obviously you'll probably want to review the PowerPoint again just to kind of go over it. So let's get started here. Anthony, you hanging in there with me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Okay, so meat can be a lot of things, not just necessarily beef, but meat can be beef. Do you know what veal is, Anthony? Have you ever heard of veal?
I heard it, but I thought it came from lamb.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So veal is a calf, which is a baby cow, and there's a lot of discussion on veal and the humaneness of veal production, and so the thing about veal is it is just so tender. And the reason why it is tender is because the calves are kept in small pens and not allowed to move around. And what this does, guys, is that it keeps the animal from developing muscle. And so it causes that meat to be very tender. And there are many people that feel like this is cruel to the animal, not letting it perform its natural functions as far as walking around and grazing and that kind of thing. And so some parts of the country are probably more prone to that than others. But there are some strong views on veal production. So who knew that meat could be controversial? So I guess maybe there are a lot more things when you get to looking around about food that maybe we should open our eyes to. Things such as people that are choose to be vegetarians or vegan. Sometimes that is a choice because of health, but sometimes it is a choice because they're making a statement about how animals are treated and things like that. So there's always a bigger picture and always lots of things to consider in this big old world. So always try to find information and use your smarts to figure out the thing that is right for you and what your heart tells you is right. So okay, so that's beef and veal, lamb, and mutton. Have you ever heard of mutton before?
Yes, but I forgot what it's from.
Well, when you sometimes at the fair or even at a rodeo, they'll have a little kids event called mutton busting. Have you ever heard of that before?
No, I haven't.
where they try to get the little kids will ride a sheep around in a pen. It's kind of funny to watch. But mutton is a grown up lamb, is an adult sheep. Okay, and I think it's a year. If they're more than a year old, they're no longer a lamb. They're a sheep or considered a mutton. Lamb is very tender. It's a young animal, whereas mutton is of course a year old, so it's a full grown animal and not quite as tender. And so traditionally, I think what we see maybe Easter, sometimes you'll see lamb as opposed to mutton. And here in Oklahoma, we don't see a whole lot of mutton on a usual table, but there are parts of the country where you do see it quite a bit. The other thing that we're not talking about here is probably goat, and goat is another one of those meat products that they grow quickly, and probably not so much here in Oklahoma, but in other parts of the country, you will see a great deal of goat meat for sale. And then you'll also see a lot of pork, and we see that here in pork, comes from a pig, and all kinds of pork chops and pork tenderloins and bacon and Canadian bacon, all kinds of yummy things. So meat, if you think about the cost of meat as in compared to things like lettuce and in compared to things like other, say, vegetables, for instance, or pasta, meat is the largest expense for a restaurant as far as something that we're going to put on a plate and that we're going to serve to our customer. And so we want to be careful that what we're buying is of good quality, and it's what our customer wants, and that we're able to sell everything that we purchase, because again, it's expensive, and so we don't want to waste it. And so it's one of those things you have to be very careful with. A lot of times restaurants will specifically inventory just the freezer, having to do with the meats and things like that. Some restaurants bring their meats in frozen. Some bring them in fresh. Some restaurants even cut their own. They'll buy a particular part of the carcass of the animal and cut their own steaks. And so it just depends on what your operation is about will determine the cuts of meat and kinds of meat that you're purchasing. But again, it is going to be pretty expensive to purchase those. But on the other hand, people expect it. So whenever you go out to eat, most often you order something that has some type of meat on the plate, whether it's even just a hamburger or if you go out for a steak dinner, all kinds of things like that. But a large percentage of the things that go out on a plate in a restaurant are usually some version of meat, poultry, or seafood. So again, there's a big expense involved in that, but it's something that we have to have because people want to buy it. Okay, remember we talked about TCS foods as time and temperature controlled for safety. So this meat is something that we have to be very careful with. So we have to handle it properly. We make sure that whenever we get it in, that it's as it should be and that we're taking care of it as we should while we have it in our possession. And so we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Okay, you hanging in there with me, Anthony?
Yes.
All right. Any questions so far?
No.
Nothing? Okay. We'll keep going then. All right. So meat has to be inspected. Okay. And what that means is the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, has to be inspected. So that's why, if you have cows, that's why you can't just butcher cows and then just sell it to the restaurant. Okay, and that's why you can't go out and shoot a deer and have deer meat in your restaurant. Okay, because that has to be graded. Now, if you have that animal butchered in a USDA approved slaughterhouse, then yes, then you can sell it, but you can't just take it to any particular meat packer or processing plant and then think that you could sell that in your restaurant, because you cannot unless it has gone through that inspection. And so a couple of years ago, we took a group of students over to, let's see, I think it's over by Wyandotte, to the there's a processing plant over there that's owned by one of the local tribes, and it was really quite interesting how they work through that process. And so they have a lot of people from the area that bring in their livestock, and then that meat is processed and then packed up and delivered. And so there's different regulations that have to do with that USDA grading, and usually there are some inspectors that work right there at that plant, and oftentimes there are veterinarians that are there as well, making sure that the animals are healthy and that they meet the grade that's expected to be for food to be sold for human consumption. And so anyway, there are several things that are looked for, but that inspection, and you'll see that stamp, that is mandatory. Now, if you buy large hunks of meat, sometimes you'll see a stamp right on that carcass that's in ink. Sometimes you'll see, if you just buy like a package of hamburger meat, for instance, you will see that stamp will be on the packaging in some way. Okay, so now there's grading characteristics, and those are voluntary. You don't have to disclose those, but again, that inspection is mandatory. Okay. All right, so here's your quality grades. And so there's pork and beef and then lamb right there, okay? And so prime, USDA prime, that is the highest quality available. And so when you think about it, when you hear commercials or you hear restaurants talking about it, USDA prime, and that means it's going to be a really great cut of meat, nice and marbled with some fat in it, and a really nice hunk of meat. Okay, you see choice, that is a high grade, and is kind of the middle of the road and fairly economical, and nothing wrong with it. It's just not the extra fancy version of prime. Okay, and then we have select, and that's a little lower grade, but it's still fine. It may be a little bit tough, or it may not have the marbling, but it depends on what you're going to do with it, because if you're making stew with something like that and you're going to cook it for a really long time, it may be just fine. So you don't need to use USDA prime to make stew with. And so it just depends on what it is that the food product that you're preparing. And so you just have to kind of know what to choose, because each one of those, as you go up that list, increases in expenditure for how much things cost. Okay. All right, so cuts of meat. So some things to think about. Okay. Whenever you think about muscle, okay, 75% water, 20% protein, and 5% fat. Okay, and so those muscle fibers are surrounded with connective tissue. Okay, and the older the animal gets, the more connective tissue it has. It's just from it out in the field walking around, it starts to build up all of that. Okay, and so because of that, it makes the meat tougher. So the older the animal gets, the tougher it gets. Okay, and so if you think about the cuts of meat that we cook for really long times, this will kind of make sense for you. So things like shoulder, things that we cook like a roast, for instance, or like a pulled pork, or a pork shoulder. Those are all things that we cook kind of what we call low and slow. So for a low temperature for quite a long time. And what that does is that low heat for a lengthy amount of time, it gives time for that connective tissue to break down. Okay, and there's a couple of kinds of connective tissue, and you need to be aware of those. Excuse me. Because one of them will have to be trimmed away and will never get any more tender no matter how long you cook it. And then one of them starts to break down slowly whenever you cook it. One is collagen, and that is the one that as you cook it, it will break down and just kind of dissolve into the meat. Okay, elastin, on the other hand, is just like it sounds, just like elastic. Okay, things like ribs, things like tenderloin, they will have connective tissue. It's also called silver skin. Sometimes you'll hear it called silver skin, and that typically is removed before cutting, because no matter how long you cook that, it's never going to be tender, and so it's leathery, and it will kind of shrink up, and things like a tenderloin, if you don't remove it, it will cause your tenderloin to kind of bow up, so it doesn't roast pretty and flat. And again, it will never be tender no matter how long you cook it, and so it's really not even edible, and so we want to remove that. And so you'll cut that away off a tenderloin. On the ribs, you'll kind of get that started, and it will just kind of rip kind of rip off. And sometimes you'll see people that do ribs, for instance, instead of pulling all of that off, they may just take a knife and score it in like a diamond shape, and that works too. And I always like to just kind of pull mine off. Once you kind of get it started, it comes off pretty well, pretty easily. Okay. All right, so here's some different cuts of meat that I want you to be aware of. And these are like when the animal is slaughtered, you think about, like a whole cow, as it's being processed, it is cut into primal cuts. And you look at this, if you kind of put those together, you can kind of see where this animal was. Like that's its legs there, and that's its hind quarter, and that's where its head was, right? So you can kind of see how that is. But these are called primal cuts. So this is an animal that is cut in half long ways. Okay, so there's its ribs. Right over there you see its ribs. Okay, and this is the inside of it, and this is the outside of it. Does that make sense, Anthony?
Yes.
Okay. So these are called primal cuts, and this is the initial cuts right from the slaughter. So what has happened is they brought the animal in. They have cleaned out anything inside of it, legs, head, all of that has been removed, and this is the actual meat part of the cow, and this is the two halves. So these are primal cuts. Okay, so here we go. All right. So meat is aged, and so if you think about when an animal is brought in for slaughter, it's been loaded in a trailer, it's been run through a maze, and it's been run into this room. And so it's pretty terrifying. It has a lot of adrenaline running through its body. And what happens is when that animal is slaughtered, it is seized. The muscles in it are seized due to that adrenaline and the trauma imposed to the animal. Okay, and so once an animal is slaughtered, once it's cut into those primal cuts that I showed you in that last slide, it is hung in a refrigerated room for quite a while. And what that does is it allows that muscle to relax naturally, and it helps to increase the tenderness of that meat. And the other thing that's happening is that meat is becoming more flavorful. So it will start to lose some of its moisture and become hopefully more tender. But aged beef is something that people really like the taste of. So it has to be done, of course, in a refrigerated way, but it definitely adds to the flavor. Okay, so whenever you buy cuts of meat at your local grocery store, you don't buy a primal cut. You don't buy a half a beef usually. I mean, sometimes people will buy half a beef, but you don't buy the whole half a beef. So usually it's cut into different parts, and then it's labeled. And so that is called fabrication. Okay, and that's that process of cutting those primal cuts into usable portions. Okay, and those are the cuts, of course, go with the kind of animal it is. Okay, and they're cut into what we call retail cuts. Okay, and then then they're packaged up, and then they're for sale. Or if you're buying it from a processing plant, it may be your beef, and then you'll get all the different parts of that animal wrapped up and ready for you to go to town with. Okay, one thing to think about is the less work your butcher does, the cheaper the cut of meat. So things like buying, for instance, a whole chicken. If you buy a whole chicken, the price by the pound of a whole chicken is cheaper than a cut up chicken because nobody had to take the time to cut it up. Same deal with beef. And so the larger hunks of beef, if you want to cut that up yourself to make your own stew meat or your own if you have your meat grinder, you can make your own chili meat. It'll be cheaper by the pound to do that. There's not, a ton of difference. So some people don't want to go to that much trouble. If you are a big restaurant operation and you have the equipment to do that, and your people know how to do it, it could, if you're doing a lot of it, it could save you some money. Okay. Roast. So I fixed a roast last night. Pretty good stuff. Okay. So roast, a lot of times, if they're a big round roast, as they cook, they will start to kind of lose their firmness, and that's what we're talking about with that elastin and that collagen. As they cook, they tend to relax. And so sometimes we will tie a roast just with cotton string. You can kind of see it here in this picture down here, Anthony. But we will tie it up, and what that does is it keeps that meat in its original shape, and that helps it cook evenly. If we didn't, it would kind of fall flat, and then those sides where it was thinner would cook more than in the middle. And so it just helps with even cooking. So it just makes a nicer presentation in the end, and it does help with the cooking temperature. Excuse me. All right. Have anybody ever had a butterfly pork chop?
I don't think I have.
Oh my gosh. Well, the butterflying, which is, you see how it's still attached here? This is all one hunk of meat, and that just folds over. Well, it makes like this little pocket, and oh my gosh, you can put all kinds of deliciousness inside this pocket. And so I like to put a little salt and pepper in there, and sometimes I'll put like dressing, like Thanksgiving dressing. Sometimes I'll put things like some kind of cheese, breadcrumbs. You could do like a sauteed onion. You can do all kinds of stuff in there, and then you can fold it back over and bake it, or roast it, or even pan fry it. But butterflying means that you have cut through the center, but you haven't cut it all the way through. It's still connected on one side. Okay. Okay, here's some specialty cuts. So medallions, those are pieces. They're just formed flat, and they're just going to be like little circles. You'll see scallops. Sometimes they'll just be pounded, like we did ours. Usually we'll do it like in parchment paper or plastic wrap and pound it out until it's fairly thin and even. And sometimes you'll see that breaded and kind of pan fried. But there's all kinds of different ways to prepare different cuts of meat. Sometimes they're fried, baked, roasted, breaded. Oh my gosh, there's so many different ways to prepare it and add things to it. So anyway, here's a few little specialty cuts that might be interesting to check out. All right, marbling. That is all of the fat that you see within the meat. Okay, and that is a good thing, because that is going to keep it nice and moist, and that is the mark of a really good steak. Now, you don't want it to be fatty and really all fat, but this marbling, like this stuff here, that's good. We like to see that. Okay, lines of fat within the lean flesh portion of the meat. So see, this is some fat here, all of that, but this is the marbling that's within. Okay, all right, and here's some other kind of meat. And so other kinds of meat, I think we are one of the few countries in the world that kind of turns our nose up at some of the we'll call it other parts of the animal. So So things like beef tongue and heart and kidney, hog's feet, chicken feet, tripe, heart and brains. Anthony, does any of that stuff appeal to you?
No, not one bit.
Okay. So, and I think that is, a lot of people are that way. And so some people you hear they love liver and onions, but you know, there's a lot of people that just don't care for it. And but I think that is us as Americans. Whenever you visit other countries, they eat it all, everything but the squeal, I think is what I heard sometimes. But you know, beef tongue, there's lots of really nice recipes for beef tongue and heart. You'll see lots of fabulous soups that include tripe, which is this down here, which is stomach lining. And so honestly, you know, it's a big world, and so I encourage you to try new things and to give things a chance, because there are some lovely things out there that are just fantastic if we can just get past our own I don't know, just unwillingness to try new things, perhaps. But we should be more curious, I think. But and they're also perhaps maybe why we don't love it is maybe because we didn't prepare it in a way that was particularly appealing either. And so always keep an open mind when it comes to food and try everything. Okay, so these are some really good methods for cooking meat. Okay, so things like broiling, which remember broiling is where the heat source comes from the top of the oven, and so really thin cuts of meat work really good like that. Grilling outside on the grill is good. And then roasting would be roasting it in the oven, and that would be, to me, roasting is at a higher temperature, perhaps for a longer time, and things like, for instance, a whole chicken. To me, that would be roasting, because I'll be mine about 400 degrees and like an hour and 20 minutes. So that to me is roasting. Okay, these kinds of dry heat, broiling, grilling, and roasting, are really best with tender cuts of meat, okay? And in a dry oven situation, dry heat, okay? All right, this is heat with fat. Remember we talked about this before, and so whenever you saute things, saute means to move quickly about the pan, okay? And stir fry, we made stir fry before at school, and stir fry, I remember we cut things into small pieces and we were cooking them in oil. Okay, and if we're pan frying something, maybe something like a chicken fry, so we have the item is not completely submerged in oil, but we have quite a bit of oil in our pan, and we're cooking that item in the oil. And then deep fry, remember, would be that something is completely submerged in oil, okay, with that. Okay, so cooking meat, moist heat in combination, okay, things like poach, and a lot of times you'll see like a poached chicken, for instance, and you may see that with some vegetables, or sometimes you'll see like a poached chicken breast, and then we'll shred that and use it for something in soup. You might see simmer or boil, which basically like a roast that we're cooking in liquid, or sometimes you'll see like a New England boiled dinner that it's like a corned beef and cabbage and potatoes and carrots, and those are all kind of one pot type cooking things. Okay. And these work really well for tougher cuts of meat, like this hunk of meat here is pretty tough, and so we cook it for what we call low and slow. And the same deal with a roast over here. They're a little bit tougher cut of meat as opposed to, say, like a steak, which would be more tender. And these types of hunks of meat need a longer time for that connective tissue and collagen to cook down and be tender. Okay, so the way that we know our meat is done, people order, if they want it rare, medium, well done, whatever temperature, that has to do with the color of the inside of the meat. Okay, and some people sometimes are pretty particular about how they want their steak cooked, and if they're paying $10 or $15, $20 for their steak, they get to have it the way they want it. And so your cook, whoever is doing that on the grill, needs to know what they're doing. And if you do this a while, you'll be able to tell by looking what temperature it is or how long it takes to get your steak to this temperature. But honestly and truly, the only way that you're really going to know what the internal temperature is with a thermometer. So if you are not sure, I would encourage you to use a thermometer. So one thing to think about, if possible, is to allow your meat to rest after you pull it out of the oven and before you cut into it. 15, 20, 30 minutes. And what I do is just tint mine with foil, leave it in the pan, take it out, put it on the stove top, and just kind of tint it with foil and let it just sit there a minute. And what that does is it allows that juice to kind of settle down inside of that meat. Because if you try to cut into it while it's still right out of the oven, it's going to lose a lot of that moisture, and it could make your hunk of meat dry. And so we don't want that. So allow it to rest. There's also something called carry over cooking. And so just because you take it out of the oven doesn't mean it's going to stop cooking. So you may gain 5 to 10 degrees even after you pull your meat out of the oven. It may continue to rise in temperature. So you need to take all of that into consideration whenever you're cooking things, even on the grill. What I usually do is I do get my grill marks on there and get it well on its way. I pull it, put it in a pan, cover it with foil, and then I put it in the oven just on hold, like about less than 200 degrees. I'm just going to let it sit in there while I do my other things, and that way I don't overcook it, and it kind of has time to go ahead and finish cooking, not overcook, and that at home really works great for me. So just a little tip there. Okay. So Anthony, did you make it through? Are you okay?
Yes.
Should I put you to sleep?
Nah.
Nah, okay. Well, thanks for bearing with me today. And so we're going to start having we'll just have our Wednesday Zoom until the 27th. Let's see, this week and the 18th and the 20th, they will all be at, this class will be at 1 o'clock. And then after that, we'll go back to our usual morning session. So anyway, I'll continue to post these on Moodle. So if you happen not to be able to join us live, they will be posted on Moodle so that you'll have access to those. Okay.
Okay. So
okay.
I'm gonna be doing Thursdays and Fridays while I'm at school.
Yeah, you will not go to tech until the 21st for your class, Anthony. Yeah, the 21st will be when your group will go back.
So I should work on like Moodle stuff on those days.
Right. So, and like for this week, you have the vocab that's on there. Okay. And if you think of it, if you guys want to do a little type up of what you made for Christmas or New Year's, if you did any kind of meats or anything, I would love to hear all about that. If you have a picture of it, that would be fantastic too, but it may be a little late to try to get a picture now. But anyway, I would love to see and or hear about what you're up to. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm gonna let you get off of here, Anthony, and I'm glad I got to see you. I hope everybody's well and stays well. And you can always text me or call me or email me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. You guys take care, okay?
Okay. Bye.
Bye.